Okay, Mr. Andjelic. Thank you very much indeed for accepting my invitation. Joe Biden will enter his second year in 2 weeks, second year his presidency. What do you think are the biggest challenge that facing with Joe Biden in foreign policy, especially in the Middle East?
Well, there are several, especially in the Middle East, there are several challenges for the American president, and it requires, first of all, to see the American involvement in the peace process, to continue seeking solution in relation between Palestinians and Israelis. And of course,
Mm.
this is the issue that has not been solved for decades now. We can also say we are entering the second century of this issue since the Balfour Declaration from 1917. But there are other issues that are present and that are looming. We have these proxy wars in Syria and Yemen that are catastrophic, affecting not only these countries but also people in the immediate neighborhood. And then, on top of all of this, there is the issue of the nuclear deal
Deal with
with
Iran.
Iran. And this is something that is not making headlines yet, but this is the issue that could affect all these other issues in a significant way. So, what I think that President Biden or his administration is trying to kind of trace the way to the kind of return to the original deal of 2015 that previous President Trump has abandoned in 2018.
Okay, in the last days, about 6 months ago, about 3 months ago or 4 months ago, the U.S. withdrawal from Afghanistan has been happened, and most critics was described as irresponsible and misleading. To what extent do you think the Biden government's decision has increased the tension in the Middle East?
For possibilities for establishment, the region and globally destabilized world. What I mean is that basically prior to the withdrawal of the American troops, there was even a statement that the Taliban will not take over the government in Kabul. Of course, it happened as soon as possible from the point of view of the Taliban. And it all tells us that it wasn't really studied through carefully and planned carefully the whole process. Even the allies, the Western allies of the United States government, complained that they were left out of the whole process. And then the people of Afghanistan who are not supportive of the Taliban doctrine, they are also left out to be basically to become victims of the newly reimposed regime in Afghanistan. And then, if we look in a broader picture, now we have this radical forces, the stateless forces that claim to interpret Islam in a specific way, that often is using terrorism as a tool to spread their doctrine or to achieve their aims. They have a territory where they could withdraw, where they could kind of seek sanctuary while being under pressure by anti-terrorist activities of the leading powers of the world. And this is really what could potentially put additional element of destabilization in the countries like Syria, for example, like even where there is a kind of currently a peaceful period, like Lebanon.
Mhm.
Wherever we have these issues, not only between the East and the West, but also within the Islam, that there are different interpretations of the religion and also differently politicized groups who are seeing arch enemies in the other groups of those who disagree with them.
Okay, at the first question, you mentioned to the Israeli and Palestinian conflict. How close do you think the normalization that start from Donald Trump's governments. Um, what do you? How close do you think the normalization of relation between several Arab countries and Israel has brought Israel to its goals? I mean, and what is your prediction for resolving the Palestinian issue after the normalization process? The normalization can affect on Palestinian issues or not?
It is going to haunt any solution that is going to be found within the broader region of the Middle East. And even if the relationship between Israel and several Arab countries in the Gulf have shifted significantly over the last few years, whatever happens in these relations is going to affect it depends how large groups of Palestinian people, but it will radicalize them because the solution to the relations between Israel and Palestine, if we are looking for the just, morally acceptable solution, which are rare or which never happen really in reality, in the real world, would be one state.
You mean, sorry, I interrupt your words. You mean they just a plan or just the words that cannot be into action, right?
No power would really support this, and there are some realistic elements that would prevent this kind of agreement. But basically, return of everyone who wants to their homes, and then we have the people who left their homes forcibly or voluntarily. I'm not entering into this now, but in 1948, so we have several generations since then who were born as refugees and lived their lives as refugees. And also we have within Israel people who were born 30 years later who legally bought the property and who has the stronger claim now. So there is no really just morally acceptable solution at the level of individual citizens. At the level of collective groups of Israelis and Palestinians, the idea of the two-state solution, I'm personally, from this moral point of view, I'm not supportive of it. I also don't see it realistically, something that in this kind of media language that is often used, two-state solution, and there will be peace and everyone will live happily ever after. Well, how independent and sovereign this supposed future Palestinian state is going to be? Are they going to be allowed to have their own army? How strong this army could be to launch artillery attacks, whatever? How much Israel is going to allow of this?
So,
I don't think.
So you think if two state nations in one land, if it is happened, it's going to be a new tension, right, between Palestinian and new.
Enough people who will be dissatisfied with the solution and who would seek to undermine this deal by some radical steps, and therefore we have the continuation of more or less the same. Unfortunately, I'm very pessimistic about the near future.
Okay, let's back to the hottest news in Middle East, and it's about Iran and U.S. talks. In recent days, we have seen positive and promising comments about the U.S. return to negotiation with Iran. The nuclear deal. The JCPOA. However, what change do you think we will see in the Middle East if the United States returns to the nuclear deal with Iran?
Well, the first change will be felt by the people in Iran because the lifting of the sanctions, economic sanctions, would significantly improve lives of people living in Iran. It will enable Iranian economy to function in a very different way, and it would free some of the restrictions on the budget of the Iranian government that now has to deal with to prevent social unrest. Because remember, it was a few years ago when people protested on the streets of larger cities because of the fuel prices, and so the state had to intervene. So this is the first element. Another element is security element, and here we have to look at the nearby great powers, Russia primarily, but also China, who have the interest that Iran respects the original deal from 2015. That there are some technical issues that, to me, they don't mean anything. But when I look at the numbers and reaching percentages that Iran is capable now to enrich percentages to something like 60%, and under the deal it should be 3.67 or whatever. For me, these numbers are telling, and this is the concern from the American point of view. And also, we have this diplomacy that European powers are involved in, basically because still Americans and Iranians are not really talking directly.
Indirectly, right?
Process of sending messages that reminds me basically of the first beginnings of the talks between Serbs and Kosovo. Albanians who also refused to sit in the same room, and then there would be American diplomats shifting between the two neighboring rooms. No, this is language of diplomacy. So I think we still have a long way to go. But this would provide the world, because nuclear weapons basically are destructive and are affecting the whole world. They cannot really be localized, and it will provide the world with the space and the energy to deal with other crises around the world, and to put this one back to the kind of old road that was started 7 years ago.
But it looks like some critics seems to think that the nuclear deal between Iran and U.S. is the first step to normalization the relation between Iran and Saudi Arabia, right? And also it's going to a first process for peace in Yemen and ending the civil war in Yemen.
How I see it, unfortunately, so far I see that Yemen has been sacrificed by the world generally, but also by the two leading powers in so-called Muslim world, by Saudi Arabia and Iran. That the relations that are not good between Saudi Arabia and Iran are being fought over in a proxy war that is taking place in Yemen. And globally, we can see that Saudi Arabia has been for a long time already considered as a kind of having special status, let's call it like this, within the American administration, and they have been allowed some steps that other nations have not been allowed. What I see that the current regime in Saudi Arabia, but also the current regime in Tehran, when I say current, it's been for a long time. I don't see how they could make peace between each other, to be honest, unless they change ideologically their positions. And how they could change and why they would change these positions, it would have to, they would have basically to be forced on these changes. What would force them on these changes, I don't know. The rise of the crown prince in Saudi Arabia has been monitored globally. Then there are kind of interpretations that he would provide revolutionary changes, deal with the corruption and so on. Every elections in Iran, every new government in Iran is being monitored, and then interpretations of the new leader, new prime minister, the new president, how the person is going to deal, what is the difference to the previous one. But basically what we see ever since, we can say ever since the Islamic Revolution in Iran in 1979, or ever since the creation of Saudi Arabian Kingdom, even earlier. More or less, it's a very fixed route and a very determined policy. I didn't see such kind of radical shifts one way or the other. Therefore, as you said, yes, the first step would be to kind of make to improve relations between the two powers. However, I do think that if United States make a deal or this permanent five that issued a joint statement recently with Iran, if they make a deal, Saudi Arabia will follow whatever it is being agreed in Vienna.
Okay. So for last question, what do you think about the biggest challenge for the Joe Biden government in 2022, inside and outside of America?
Well, the health of the nation is one issue that is present that affects all governments, but the United States had the largest number of victims falling to COVID. But if you look into the foreign policy, it's for them, and the concern for them, the main concern is rise of China and the issues that are therefore in the Pacific. So we have two leading powers, both economically and politically, and rising capabilities of China militarily. And this is the issue that is going to drive foreign policy of the United States. All other issues are of secondary importance and are seen through this prism of relations with China or competition with China. This is seen from European point of view, for example, in relations with Russia, that the Americans are not pushing as strong against Russia, fearing that a possible alliance between Russia and China could counterweight their domination in the Pacific or the American domination globally. So we have these differences on the Western, let's call it Western Front, in the Western Alliance between European leading members of the Western Alliance and the Americans, because they see their immediate interest differently, and the main concern for Europeans is Russia. And in China, they see a great market and potential economic partner. They are not affected as much with the events in what is called South China Sea, and with the exception of the United Kingdom that is recreating its foreign policy following Brexit, all other Europeans are focused on European soul primarily.
Okay, anything else, Mr. Neven Andjelic?
I really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much indeed.